030, flying to Air Devil, runway 24, clear for takeoff.
Roger, Delta 252, turn right heading 090, climb and maintain 4,000 feet, clear for takeoff.
Boogie's 135, Aviation 16. Port side, high, I'm coming down hard.
Roger. 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. We have a liftoff.
All right, Jimmy Hayes, it is a pleasure to be here with you. I've been super excited to talk about this specifically with you because there cannot be too many CEOs of a huge company, 50,000 people plus, that have as much flight time and experience as you. There's just no way. Do you know of any?
Oh, there's certainly a lot of CEOs who flew, or perhaps they've retired and they fly now, but there's probably not many that have flown. Certainly the number of hours I've flown or the variety of different types of planes that I fly, it's pretty rare.
It's crazy. Yeah. So 50,000 employees.
80,000.
80,000 employees. You've flown to 47 different countries on your own,
That's
over
correct.
40 airplanes.
Close to 50.
Close to 50. And you've just passed 7,600 hours of flight time.
Correct.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right. I want to get into biography type stuff. Really not particularly talk about aviation yet.
Yeah.
I want to know, where were you born? Siblings? What'd you do in school? Did you play sports? What was your gearhead? What was it like?
Well, I grew up in a small town south of Atlanta, about 15 miles south of the Hartsfield Airport. It was Palmetto, Georgia.
Okay.
Very southern tip of Fulton County. Probably half of the people in that city either worked for Delta Airlines or perhaps Eastern Airlines. Some of them were pilots. Some of them maybe worked baggage. Some of them were redcoats at Delta. And I knew a lot of them because when I was 13, I was sacking groceries, probably for most of them at the local grocery store.
Okay.
But so I knew a lot of people that were attached to the airlines. In fact, my brother was a A&P at Delta for his entire working career. He wasn't a pilot, but he was 16 years older than me, but he spent his entire working life at Delta Airlines. But having said that, I grew up in this small town. We lived a block off of the city, off the main street. My dad drove an 18-wheeler for a living, and it was gone Monday through Friday. And as I mentioned, my brother was 16 years older than me. My sister was 14 years older than me. So I was sort of an only child living at home. And it was a small town, and I had this ability and knack for moving around the city, having all kinds of different odd jobs, even before I was 13 years old. And one of the things I did is I hung out at the gasoline station, which was a block from our house. Remember, this would have been in the early 60s, so it was a different world than we have today. So I was a young guy up at the gasoline station, and the person that owned the gasoline station also owned a drag strip. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, I worked at that drag strip. On Friday nights and Saturday nights, it was a drag strip. During the day, it was an airport. It was South Fulton Airport. Back in the day, it was 8 Alpha 9. It's now gone. It was 2,700 feet long, a tree at both ends. And I would be there working at the drag strip, whether I was cooking hamburgers, selling tickets, working the starting line, working the finish line. I would see these airplanes come in, probably mostly 150s, maybe a Cherokee, maybe a really cool-looking 310 back in those days. And I'd say, man, that's cool. These airplanes are kind of cool. And I was a gearhead. Remember, I was working at a drag strip. I had a Cushman Eagle motor scooter. I had a go-kart. And I really didn't have any money to do any of that stuff. But I worked these odd jobs to have a little bit of cash to do the things that I did. But I always said, I think I would really like to learn to fly. That would be cool. But be that as it may, I didn't go up in an airplane. In fact, I went off to college at the University of Georgia, and then I went straight into graduate school. And I worked my way through school and paid for my college education and my graduate school education by working summers at either the Ford Motor Company right next to the Hartsfield Airport, or perhaps at a trucking company where my dad worked loading trucks in the summer. So I made a lot of money. And then the last that paid for college. Last 2 years of undergraduate, last year of graduate school, I worked as an accountant in a hospital. So that also paid my way to get through my degrees in college. So in 1975, I graduated. And I was a single guy just out of college with a job at Price Waterhouse, making very good money. Wasn't married, didn't have any responsibilities. So I went back to that little airport at South Fulton. And I walked up to the counter and I said, I'd like to go up in an airplane. I think I would like to learn to fly. Now, this is 1976 actually. It was a year after I graduated. I'd never been in an airplane. I'd never even flown on Delta Airlines at that time, or Eastern, or any airline. So I'd like to go up in an airplane. I think I'd like to learn to fly. I believe it was July 14th, 1976. It was a Sunday. And I took off in a Cessna 150. It was November 15156. And I sort of knew from the moment we started down the runway and lift started to gather and we began to climb away from the airport, I sort of knew right away that this was something I really wanted to do. Now, I can be a little compulsive, is my nature. So as a consequence of that, a week later, I soloed. I had 5.6 hours in my logbook. And I soloed a 150. Then I left to go out of town. I was out of town for 2 weeks training at Price Waterhouse. I came back, and 5 weeks later, I had my license with 40 hours of time. 2 weeks later, I bought an airplane.
Are you kidding me?
$8,000. I bought a 1961 175. It had 1,200 hours on the airframe. It had a NavCom that worked most of the time, a transponder that pretty much never worked, and a wing leveler that worked when you wanted or needed it. And
you kept it at that airport?
Actually, I moved it to Charlie Brown, back to the Fulton County. Back
Really?
then we called it Charlie Brown. And I was tied out on the line at Hill Aircraft at Charlie Brown starting in 1976. And I recall many times landing at that airport and there would be Gulf Streams coming in behind me. The irony of that is quite often those Gulf Streams coming in behind me would have been Cox's planes, who I ended up spending my career with after Price Waterhouse. So that's the
very
ironic. The real irony.
Gosh.
A year into owning the 175, I went into a partnership with 3 other guys, and we bought a 182. We bought a 1977 182. It was 1 year old. And it was a nice IFR platform. 2 of the guys flew some for work during the week. 2 of us flew on the weekends. And it was a great partnership. I kept that plane for a couple of years, continued to build time. Flying a 182 was really cool, particularly starting in a 150, owning a 175. The 182 was a great platform.
Did you end up going straight into instrument training?
I started my instrument training after we got the 182.
Okay.
But actually didn't finish it. I started training, and then over the next couple of years, a couple of things happened. Number 1, I got married. Number 2, I started a new job. And number 3, we had a son. So now all of a sudden, I have no time and no money for aviation. So between 76 and 83, I flew 337 hours. And then I stopped flying, and my focus then was my family and my job, and it wasn't aviation.
So 83 to what year did you not fly?
I didn't fly from 83 until 2001.
I cannot believe you had an 18-year break.
Yeah.
And you now have 7,600 hours.
Yeah.
So when you went from Price Waterhouse to Cox?
Yeah, in 1980.
In 1980. Did they come after you, or did you just come after them? How'd that happen?
I had been with Price Waterhouse 5 years, and my career was going very well. I'd just been promoted to audit manager, so it was a big deal. I was managing a bunch of people, traveling around, doing different cool companies doing their audits. And I got a call from a recruiter. That was pretty commonplace that recruiters would call public accounting firms looking for experienced people to move into accounting departments of companies. And I had a call one time from a headhunter, and I said, yeah, I really don't think I want to leave Price Waterhouse. I think I might stay and become a partner. And then I said, but if something really comes up that you think I should listen to, give me a call. 2 weeks later, this guy calls me back. And it's to go to work for a company by the name of Cox. And back then it was called Cox Broadcasting. Cox Broadcasting was back then the non-newspaper part of the company. In 1980, Cox Enterprises was the newspaper company, and it was totally privately owned by the family. Cox Broadcasting was television, radio, and a small little cable television business and a small little Mannheim automobile auction business. So in 1980, the combined revenues of both companies, Cox Enterprises and Cox Broadcasting, was probably less than $500 million. But there was something intriguing about the opportunity to go to work for Cox, because they owned the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which my family grew up with as a subscriber in our house. We watched WSB television, we listened to WSB radio, and there was just something intriguing about the company. But in reality, it was a lateral job from the standpoint of a salary. It was a lateral move. And I went from being an audit manager and managing a bunch of people to having a department of 5 people. But still, there was something that was intriguing to me about that job.
Did your coworkers think you were nuts going there?
Well, it was pretty commonplace for people to leave public accounting because you worked extremely long hours and move into industry. So it wasn't necessarily unusual. In fact, it was quite common.
I gotcha.
However, it turned out to be an incredible move on my part. Over the course of the next couple of years, I gained a lot of responsibility, and then the company continued to grow. And by the time I retired, as I mentioned earlier, we were 80,000 employees, $20 billion in revenue, and I went from being corporate controller to retiring as the president and CEO of the company.
It's just amazing. So when I was at Cox, you were the CFO.
Of the cable division.
Of the cable division. Okay. All right. I didn't remember that.
Yeah. But
you were in charge of the corporate flight department.
That's correct.
And was it because that's what fit in? Like before you, the Cox CFO, Cox Cable CFO?
No. I'll tell you how that came to be.
Yeah.
And
seems like a natural fit, right? I mean, you're a pilot, you know numbers.
That's one of the reasons why that happened. So historically, Cox Broadcasting, the part of the company that I joined, we did not have airplanes. Cox Enterprises had 1 plane, 3 pilots, and 2 mechanics. And that plane was primarily used to move the Cox family around and to take a couple of the newspaper executives around. In 1985, we merged Cox Enterprises and Cox Broadcasting into one company. A lot of the officers in Cox Broadcasting became the officers in the merged company. And Jim Kennedy asked if I would oversee the corporate flight department, even though I was in the cable division. Actually, at that point in time, I was still at corporate. So I was not in the cable division in 1985. So I was at corporate, but he asked me if I would oversee the flight department because he knew I was a pilot historically. And he also had confidence in me as someone who would do a good job in whatever responsibility that he happened to assign to me. So I said, sure, I love it. So I started out, and it was
this is 85.
85. It was 1 plane, 3 pilots, 2 mechanics, and over the course of the next few years, a couple of things happened. We took delivery of a second airplane. Again, at that point, primarily used to move family members and some executives around. But then the cable division started to grow and grow significantly, and we realized that we needed to have the ability to move management out into the field locations, perhaps to go be on spot in certain acquisitions where we were trying to get there before competition would. So we all of a sudden realized that aviation could enable us to be better at what we did. So we started growing the size of the flight department and enabling larger segments of management to use the plane to both get out to the field to visit our operating locations, but yet get them back home so that we didn't, we were a family-oriented company. We believed in taking care of our employees because they're a valuable resource. So if we could get people out to the field and get them back home, it was sort of a better quality of life all the way around. And as a consequence of that, we grew the flight department to have 5 airplanes, 15 mechanics, and a staff of almost 50 people by the time you include dispatch, pilots, mechanics, cleaners, and all the people it took to operate that operation. So at that point in time, we were operating 2 Gulfstreams and 3 Hawkers, and each of the Hawkers were flying 500 to 600 hours each a year, and the Gulfstreams were flying about 250 hours each a year. So that was quite a lot of operations around the globe, I might say.
Yeah. So for your personal flying, was it September 11th that made you start up flying again? Because you said 2001
Yes.
is when you cranked it back up?
No, wasn't connected to that whatsoever. So during the time that I was managing the flight department,
Okay.
or which continued for a lot of years on, but often on flights, if I didn't have something going on in the back of the plane that I needed to prep for a meeting we were traveling to, a lot of times I would sit in the jump seat, particularly of the Gulfstreams, and I would watch the pilots and listen and learn, and that just always intrigued me with having with what was going on up in the cockpit. But what really happened was this: there were two guys that worked with me in the cable division that both were pilots.
Okay.
They both had Bonanzas. And then there was a guy that worked out where I worked out at the gym who had a T6. They all kept asking me to go fly with them. And this is a funny story, but this is exactly what happened. So one week, I flew with Scott Hatfield in his Bonanza, and then I flew with Terry Adams in his T6. And it just rekindled the flame.
Lit a fire.
The fire. Because by 2001, my children were older. They were off to school, and I had a little more time on my hands. And so I immediately went out and bought a brand new 182. And I picked a 182 purposely because that's where I stopped my flying. So I said I should start back flying something that I was familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought a brand new 182. We immediately stripped out all the avionics and put this large Garmin suite of avionics in it. And it had a really great setup. And that's what began my rekindled flying relationship. So that was 2001. And since 2001, as you said, I've flown coming up on 7,700 hours.
It's such an immense amount of flying. All right. So as a CEO, president, you're probably on different boards around at different companies during that time span?
I was not on other public company boards or other non-affiliated Cox boards.
I got
Quite
you.
often a CEO will do that, but
Not with
I
a
kept
private
my
company.
focus on Cox.
Gotcha.
So I would be on boards of companies that we owned or had partnership interest in.
Gotcha.
But I was not on non-affiliated Cox boards. That just wasn't our style per se.
It's interesting that you had this massive gap between your two older siblings. I had 6 and 9 years between my sisters, and I felt like an only child as well. I mean, you have the ability to just go do whatever, whenever, but there's nobody around. And so it must have been interesting because your dad's on the road, your mom's doing what she's doing, and you're just doing life on your own. And that's why you had these jobs and did all this stuff.
Sure.
It's crazy.
In fact, remember, again, the time that we're talking about, my brother and sister left home early, and they weren't in the house at all. So I really did grow up somewhat an only child.
That's crazy.
We had a close, loving relationship.
Sure.
But
they
I didn't really see them
They were
terribly
old.
often at that point in life.
So this aviation bug, I'll call it, you definitely were a bit while you're working at that airport,
Yeah.
I would say. But then it absolutely dug in on that first rolling down the runway in that 150.
Yeah, I think, I had the predisposition to like anything that had engines, perhaps other than a lawnmower. But so I had a predisposition to like flying to begin with.
Yeah.
But so the working at the drag strip exposed me to it. But really where it began is when I got in the cockpit myself and started down the runway. That's when I said, this is pretty cool.
Okay, so why going to college was your thought process not, I'm going to go do the airline thing or the military thing, and you just went into the business world?
Actually, when I first went off to college, I was pre-med. Honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college. I had no clue. But math and science were strong subjects for me in high school. So I said, well, maybe I'll be a doctor. So I go off and I'm pre-med at the University of Georgia. And, coming from a small town to a big school, I didn't study near as much as I should have. So after 2 years, I was clearly not going to make it in pre-med. And that summer, I was working at the Ford Motor Company. I'll never forget it. And a guy across from me, we were doing door glass trim in Cougars and and one other Ford car. I forget which one it was.
Just on the line,
On
and
the
you're
line.
on college.
It's summertime.
No
a
kidding.
summertime job. And the guy across the way from me, he said, Jimmy, you need to go back to college and get your degree. And I said, yeah, you're right, I do. So I decided that I was definitely going back, but I decided I would switch to business. And why was that? Well, another job I had, starting when I was 16, is I worked in a clothing store. The guy that owned the clothing store, his name was Gordon Jones, and he was Gordon Kilgore. He was a really cool guy. He was, so I'm 16 working in his clothing store, and he's maybe 32. And he raced motorcycles.
Okay.
Well, I got into racing motorcycles because of Gordon.
Okay.
And he had a business degree. So that sort of caused me to switch to business. Now, I didn't know anything about the business degree. I didn't know anything about accounting. But the very first quarter, I took an accounting course, and a light bulb went off, and I just sort of fell in love with it. So the next 13 undergraduate classes I took, I made 10 A's and 3 B's. So I became a very compulsive, successful guy in the business degree area.
Gotcha.
And then what happened, and I was working in a hospital in Athens as an accountant, completing my undergraduate degree. I graduate. I've got the minimum number of business hours it takes to have a business degree with a major in accounting. So I had one of the best decisions I ever made is I went straight into graduate school. In graduate school, I learned to research and write, which were incredibly, I didn't know at the time, it was incredibly important skills that stayed with me for the rest of my life. The ability to research a topic and write some conclusion and summary of that particular topic, whatever it might happen to be. That stayed with me all of my career, and it was incredibly important. So I really owe that to Gordon to a large degree, who prompted me toward the business area.
Was the military flying or civilian flying ever a thought in your mind?
Good question. So before I made the decision to go back to school, or to change my major, I should say, when I went back that fall, I did go down to the Air Force Draft Board. I said, I think I'd like to go in and be a pilot. This is during Vietnam. I had a high draft number. I was not going to get drafted. But I said, okay, I'll go down to the Air Force and see if I could be a pilot. I walked into the draft board somewhere in Atlanta, Forest Park, maybe, I can't remember exactly. And I said, I'd like to be a pilot. And they looked at me and they said, you're wearing glasses, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, what's your vision? And I told them, they said, you can't be a pilot. You have to have better vision than that to be a pilot. And I looked at him and I said, well, you can't have me because I have a high draft number, so I'm going back to school.
Wow.
So I did not go into college, rather into the Air Force, because in those days we didn't have the surgeries you can have today to change your vision. I was bummed, but in retrospect, it's probably the best thing that could have happened because I had an incredible work career that has allowed me to experience an incredible aviation life.
Yeah.
Probably not comparable. Not many people have had what I have been able to experience in aviation.
Not at all.
And I couldn't have done all of that if I hadn't had such a successful business career.
Yeah, very true. That's a very interesting bio. Very interesting. I love to see how it all starts when we all start off at scratch, basically, right? And then where does it lead from there? It's very, very zigzaggy. I mean, it really is. It's pretty cool. All right. So this next section, just if you want to stop and tell a story, feel free. Otherwise, we'll roll on. Total flight time.
Right at 7,700 hours.
Pilot ratings or type ratings?
Single engine, multi-engine, instrument, land, citation, single pilot, sign off in the 525. I fly Pilatus PC-12s. That's not really a type rating. It's an endorsement. I have an L39 endorsement. It's not really a rating. It requires a special FAA endorsed training program, syllabus, and check ride to fly the L39. I have the same endorsement that's on the back of my license, actually, for the Pilatus PC-9.
Okay.
The PC-9 was it still is, a high-performance military, former military in my case, aircraft. It's 1,100 horsepower airplane, so it requires the same training syllabus, similar training syllabus as the L-39, where you go through an FAA-endorsed training program and then a series of training flights and then an FAA check ride.
I gotcha.
So those are my primary.
First airport you soloed from was?
South Fulton.
South Fulton. Hardest airplane you've ever flown?
For me personally, it was probably the Waco, and that's probably going to sound unusual because I've flown a lot of tail draggers and a lot of the T6. I've got 500 hours flying T6s. A lot of people would say that's the hardest airplane to fly and land. That's why they call it the pilot maker. But I found the T6 to be a great landing plane as long as you respected it and as long as you continued to fly the airplane all the way to the hangar. The Waco for me was always, with the light controls, it was harder for me to get a good feeling in my landing. So I didn't enjoy, and I felt it was the most challenging plane for me to land. Flying around was easy, but it was always the landing that was more challenging.
Easiest airplane you've ever flown? These are great questions.
Those are great questions because easy can go. You can go down lots of different
I had
avenues.
a guy say it was the Airbus and not a 152. I'm like, what the heck? How can you say that? But you get so far in your career, you forget kind of.
Yeah. If you really go easy, I think you have to stay out of complex aircraft. So I would say maybe the Carbon Cub.
Okay.
It's a very forgiving plane. Everything happens slow. It has no bad characteristics.
I remember when you had that was a cool airplane. Very cool airplane. Hardest aircraft systems to learn?
Well, I like aircraft systems. I like avionics. It's my thing. But I'll tell you the most complex avionics systems plane that I've owned personally and flown was the CJ2 Plus because it had Honeywell Fusion.
Okay.
Fusion was a glass cockpit update of the Honeywell Proline Collins cockpit. And it's not that it had a great amount of information. It was a very good display of situational awareness. That wasn't the problem. It required a lot of button pushing
to get there,
to set up the flight plan. And then if you're flying at single pilot, which I did often, if you had a change at the last minute, say of a different runway, there's a lot of button pressing you've got to do to change runways and get your head back in the game. I liked that sort of thing, but that was part. I thought it was never as elegant of a solution as the Garmin cockpit.
Gotcha. Scariest moment you've had in an airplane?
Knock on wood. I haven't had many scary moments. I've had instances. You know, we probably all had one where the plane came a little bit closer than I thought they was going to come. I remember just after I obtained my license in 1976, I was flying that 175 that I bought down south of South Fulton. And I believe, if my memory serves me right, it was a twin-engine plane. I believe it was a Baron. These were days when we didn't really talk to ATC quite a lot. We didn't have ADSB. We didn't have transponders that even worked half the time. And there was a plane that went flying by before I knew it. I remember that to this day. So I'd have to say that would be in the top 5. I've never had an emergency situation develop where I felt I was, at a high risk. I had a few scenarios where I had to think about what was happening. I was flying the PC-9 doing acro not far from here one day, and I looked down and my oil pressure had gone down to 0. It's the PT-6 engine. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, oil pressure's down, oil temperature is good, performance is good. So what I did is I immediately knocked off the aerobatics, told Tampa I was going back to the Sarasota airport, stayed up high, and I'm tapping on the oil pressure and it's not moving, but I'm thinking I may have a pressure indicator issue.
Temperature still staying good?
Temperature was good. So all those things that you look for.
Sure.
So Tampa had asked me to turn north and come back and land on 14, and I said, no, I tell you what, I have the runway in sight. I'm just planning on landing on runway 4. And I did that purposely because I wanted to stay high and stay close to the airport. They said, okay, contact tower. I contacted tower. I stayed high in the pattern. I came back around. I landed. I shut down. I called the guy that did the maintenance on the PC-9, and what it turned out to be, I removed the sensor, and cleaned it with Corrosion X, put it back in, and it was good to go from that point on.
That was it.
That wasn't a life-threatening situation, but it was one of those things where I had to think about what was happening.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, it's a gauge, or it's real. How about an aviation moment that you'll just never forget? It could be just a sunset. It could be, I can't believe I saw that. Just something you'll never forget.
I'm going to do a couple. I'm going to call them aviation memories.
Okay.
I lived in Atlanta for 61 years, but we've had a place in Sarasota since around about the time I started back flying, around 2001.
Okay.
In fact, there's a correlation between that. Maybe we'll get to that story as well. But I remember we would fly down here often on weekends. And one of the trips we were flying down, and I had a Baron. That was my wife, our daughter, and myself. Our son was at college. And I remember we were on top of the clouds, and it was one of those iconic evenings. It was a night flight where the moon was just lit up, and it looked larger than life. And that was kind of one of those memory things that's etched into stone.
Yep.
Another thing which relates a little bit to a story is Matt Miller, who was a pilot, the chief pilot at Cox, and a longtime friend, gave me a book years ago written by Rinker Buck. And the book is about two young boys, 16 and 14 maybe, I think was their age. I don't quite remember. And they flew a J3 Cub around the United States, across the United States. And I read that book and I said, someday I think I would like to do an aviation adventure. So I decided it was probably going across the Atlantic. I know it was going across the Atlantic. I was probably on one of Cox's Gulf Streams. I could have been on a commercial airline. I'm not sure. I said, I looked at the map and I saw Goose Bay, and I said, you know what? I think I want to fly to Goose Bay. That would be a cool aviation venture. It's all the way up to the very northeast point of the North American continent. So I said, that's what I want my aviation adventure to be. So, I continued to work, and then as I continued to develop years of experience in flying, and I was still working, I saw a magazine article that had this company called Air Journey, and they led excursions, aviation excursions. Lots of different countries, but in fact around the world. So I decided I was going to do the around the world trip when I retired. So that became my aviation adventure, but I actually did land in Goose Bay. I've landed there several times. But of that long-winded story, one of the things I remember is, we were gone on the around the world trip for 76 days. And we crossed the North Atlantic and crisscrossed the European continent and down into Marrakesh, Morocco, and all through Asia, Oman, Jordan, Turkey, Dubai, lots of places. And I remember a couple of things that they're kind of etched in stone from that trip. I remember when we crossed we were headed into Dubai, and I heard an American accent on ATC very distinctly. And I had not spoken to many American air traffic controllers since we left the United States on the beginning of this journey. And I said, man, it sure is nice to hear an American accent. Why is that? And they said, well, we're ATC for this part of the country. It's what we do. And so I remember that. And then the second thing that's sort of related, it's also ATC. As we completed our journey, we came back through all of Asia, and we're going up through Siberia, which would have been Sakhalin, Magadan, and Anadyr. From Anadyr, which is a military base, we crossed the Bering Sea into Anchorage, Alaska. And I remember vividly, all of us, there were 5 airplanes, and we all had this reaction. When we crossed the Bering Sea after, we were on day 70 of 76, and we'd been through some pretty trialing, weather and times like that, particularly in Russia. When we crossed back into the United States and talked to an American controller, it was actually an emotional moment. So
really?
I remember that vividly.
Wow.
It was you almost teared up because
like
you're so
home.
glad to be back home. And you've made it around the world in a single
Isn't
engine
that
airplane.
amazing? Just a voice. Just a voice.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's crazy. All right. Dumbest thing you've ever done in an airplane?
I would say, I hope I have it. I don't have a long list of these items, but we all have had things that we look back on and say, well, we probably shouldn't have done that.
It's impossible not to. It's impossible.
I think the top of my list would be, as I started back flying, I went from a 182 to a Baron. And earlier we talked about my instrument training, and I'd started instrument training in early 78 or so when I had the 182, but then I didn't finish my instrument rating. So when I bought the 182, I started back and finished my instrument training, and then I moved to a Baron. So I was a pretty new instrument pilot. And I remember taking off from Lake Kiowee one morning, and it was foggy, and I did a 0-0 takeoff and in a single-engine piston airplane. And I knew the fog was only going to be up to about 600 feet.
Sure.
But in retrospect, that was dumb, because if anything had happened, I'd been very difficult to make my way back into an airport that didn't even have an ILS.
For sure. For sure.
So that was a dumb one.
We all have them. Dream airplane you'd still love to fly.
You mean one I've never flown, or one
That's right. You haven't flown it,
Oh.
and you'd still love to fly it.
We haven't talked about it yet, but and you've seen in my office here, at the hangar, I built 6 flight simulators, and the Mac Daddy of all is the Airbus, and now I'm building a Mac Daddy 737 sim. So I guess if I wanted to pick something that I have never flown that I would like to fly, it'd either be the Airbus or Gulfstream.
Okay. Love it.
Now, I just have to say, I have flown the Gulfstream quite a bit on one of my simulators, so I feel I could fly either one of them.
Mine would be probably the Concorde.
Oh,
Probably the Concorde would be mine, because you combine that fighter jet Mach 2 with the airliner thing.
yeah, that's cool.
And it's funny. I'll tell you this story, because I was at Cox. I'm young. I'm in my 20s, flying back from Europe. We're at 40-something thousand feet, thinking that we're just, the G4 at the time was the it airplane. We're cruising back. We're crossing 50 West. And so we're transitioning from Shamwick to Gander, and you check in, and then you give them an estimate to the next, to like 60 West or whatever, or 40 West. Concorde checks in at 50 West as well. But instead of seeing that 1,000-knot closure that you normally see when you're passing airplanes, he's flying away from us at like 1,000-knot closure type thing, where it just he's going as fast that way as if it would be this way. He's at 62,000 feet, and he is estimating getting to New York at the same time we're going to get to 40.
Wow.
And it was just
that's a surreal moment.
Of this is crazy. Airliners are down lower. We're up high. There's the Concorde. Pretty dang cool. So that's my airplane.
Well, the 2 airplanes I mentioned, you've flown both of them, so you've got me there.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about flying, is everybody for the most part has this crazy different path that they go on. And sometimes you make decisions that cut you off from the ability to fly planes that you'd like to fly, but it's the smart decision to do.
Yeah.
Or you just don't get the opportunity. Maybe you had the opportunity and you didn't take it, or you simply just don't have the opportunity. And that's just the way the ball bounces. But I mean, how many different airplanes are there? You can't fly them all.
Right.
I mean, you can fly a lot, but you can't fly them all. Biggest aviation regret?
I probably should never have sold the S&J that I had. I had what is one of the finest S&Js. So T6 is the broad type.
Okay.
S&J was the Navy version. T6 was the Air Force version. The Harvard was the Canadian or the British version. So externally, they almost look identical, except for the Harvard, which has a big ADF antenna on the back of it. So they look all the same, but mine was an S&J. And it was built by a man in Southern California he was an A7 pilot, and he was a doctor. And he was the S&J particularly was very important to him because of some tie-in with his father. I don't remember that tie-in. But he spent 20 years collecting parts to build what he said would be the finest S&J T6 in the world. He spent 20 years collecting the parts and then 10 years building this airplane from a data plate. I met him in 2010, and he was about halfway through that project. He had a whole dedicated website to the plane, and And I'd been looking for a really nice T6 S&J. And I looked at this project and I said, man, this would be the nicest one in the world. So I continued talking to him, and he said, my plan is to finish the plane, take it to some air shows, have it judged, and then I'll be selling it. So when I do sell it, it's important that it have a really good home. I said, great. And so that was in 2010, I believe. And then I went on about other aviation adventures, and I bought the PC-9. I had a Waco, and I forgot all about the T6. And then he called me one day in 2017, and he said, Jimmy, I just finished. He said, I'm selling the S&J. And he said, you were the first person that called me. I wanted to have a really nice home, someone who will respect what's been done here, take care of it. So without hesitation, I said, I'll buy it. And I said, I'll sell the Waco. I'll buy the S&J. I went to Warbird Adventures. I got checked out in a T6. And Tom from Warbirds flew with me to California, and we flew back across the U.S. in the S&J. Cool. And then I did my thing to it. He made it very authentic. And my theory on World War II planes is they should be very authentic on the outside and as reliable and as they can be in terms of avionics on the inside, because I was planning to fly cross country for lots of formation clinics. So I wanted situational awareness, I wanted weather, I wanted autopilots, I wanted a glass cockpit, which is what I did. I put a glass cockpit in the S&J, and it was really, really, really a nice plane. And I flew it several years for about 500 hours. And then I'd gone into a partnership in a P-51 Mustang. And this is a long answer, but it kind of parallels an answer. I'm going to answer two questions in one. And now I'm a partner in a P-51, and I said, okay, I've got lots of time in the T6 S&J, which prepared me to fly a P-51 from the standpoint of operating a tail dragger and all my other tail dragger experience. I have 2,000 tail dragger landings, so I've got a lot of experience there. But I said, I really need to focus on the P-51, not the S&J. So I sold the S&J. And then the way my mind started working is I love the P-51. It's a really nice flying airplane, and I did a lot of nice training in it. And I had great partners. But one partner was on the east coast of Florida, one partner was in Georgia, one partner was in Tennessee. So I didn't get to see the plane often enough. My theory, particularly at my age then and now, is if I'm going to fly very complex aircraft, the way I solve for that is with training, checklist discipline, commonality of avionics, and frequency of flight. And if I wasn't seeing the P-51 often enough to fly at the level of competency that I thought I should be flying the plane at, then the partnership didn't work for me. So I sold my interest in the P-51. And at that point, I realized I should have kept the S&J. So I bought a T6 to replace that type of flying. And it was a nice plane. It was owned by a very nice gentleman who was a longtime member of NATA who had passed away. And I bought it from him before he passed away. And I remember he cried when I took off in his plane because it was a part of his heritage, a part of his life. And I did an update on it, but whereas my S&J was a 2000, if you can understand this, my S&J was a 2014 1944 airplane with, at the time I bought it, 174 hours on the airframe since it had been built. The T6 was a G model. It was a 1949 airplane with 14,000 hours on it. So I never felt as comfortable in the avionics the aerobatics that I do in those planes in the T6 that I did in the S&J. So I really regret not keeping the S&J because I had such a long history with it, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful airplane. Now, parallel to that, I mentioned the P-51. If there's one plane that I would wish I had had a longer relationship with and perhaps bought one and owned one 100%, it would have been the P-51. I could do that today. It's just, to do that, I don't think I could give I don't want to stop flying my L-39. I don't want to stop flying my PC-7, and never mind the PC-12. That's what I consider my go-place airplane. But I want to continue flying both of those airplanes. And if I bought a P-51, I could do it. Insurance would let me do it.
Mm-hmm.
They would. But it would. But the way I think about it, I would need to fly it so much to say at the level of proficiency I want to be at in a P-51 that I'd need to fly the PC-7 and the L-39 less. So it makes it difficult.
Just not enough time in the
Not
day.
enough time. Yeah.
So do you know where the SNJ is now?
Yeah, I do.
They taking good care of it?
He is. He offered to sell it back to me he called me
Really?
about 3 months ago and said, I'm going to sell the SNJ. And so it's a very expensive SNJ, and
Okay.
I sold it to him at a high price. He has put a new engine and a new propeller in it, which I'm not sure why he did it, but there's only a couple of reasons why you put a new engine and a new propeller on an SNJ when it's not really due. A prop strike or
Sure.
a hard landing resulting in a prop strike, and I don't know if that happened or didn't happen, but he wanted to sell it back to me at a price that included the cost of the new engine and the new propeller. And I said, it just doesn't make any sense. I said, it's worth the same price that I sold it. So I made him an offer, a fair offer, but he wouldn't sell it at that price. So I've moved on.
So he still has it?
He still has it.
Still track it?
It still is a possibility it could come back home, but
Pilot watch of choice.
I don't wear watches. My iPhone.
Best pilot you've ever flown with?
Oh. Well, first of all, I have to say that the Cox pilots that were there when I was there, including you, were the mentors that I looked to that were great, great pilots. Put those guys aside, I would say Ed Lindsay is Ed Lindsay's
he stands
friend.
out in your mind?
He stands out in my mind because he's one of these guys that can fly anything. And he's flown right seat with me quite a bit in the Citation and the PC-12. And he's flown over 100 different types of airplanes. But here's the thing about Ed. He doesn't just show up and go fly. The very first time he flew with me, when he showed up, he had already studied the manual. Even though he was going to be in the right seat working checklist and talking to ATC and I'm flying the plane, he showed up knowing the plane. So as we continue to fly over the last several years, I will let him fly legs in the plane, and he's just incredibly smooth, incredibly talented, and it's definitely there are a lot of guys like that, but I pride myself on being a very good pilot, but he's really exceptional.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, first job you ever had? Bagging groceries?
No. I started bagging groceries at 13. But prior to that, I worked part-time for hourly here and there. I helped a guy shoe horses. I helped a guy who was a plumber. I helped a guy dig graves.
This is prior to 13?
Prior to 13. For one morning, I worked at a golf course. I didn't like that because I'm not a.
How do you get a job digging graves prior to 13, and what does your mom say?
I remember I grew up in a small town of 2,500 people. So I worked for people. Yeah, I just had this knack of finding these ways to have jobs and make money. Even though I had no money, I always had money. And I found out, by the way, a couple of things. The horses were hard because my job in doing a horse was to do the fire and hold the horse. And I was a little skinny guy. And I remember one time the horse stepped on my foot, like it broke my toe. So that was a great job. Plumbing, I was just handing tools and I didn't really know anything about it. And digging graves, that didn't last long either. I did a grave and they would dig the grave with a backhoe, and then you would finish it with shovels and
Score it out.
and core it out, and I would take the wheelbarrow to move the dirt over, and I wasn't strong enough to hold the wheelbarrow from turning over, so that job didn't last very long. So those were my first 3 jobs I remember being paid a few bucks an hour to do. But 13 was my first official job, sacking groceries. It was Thursday afternoon, Friday, and Saturday. I made 90 cents an hour, and my take-home pay was $13.76 a week plus tips.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. All right. So let's move into some kind of aviation slash businessman thought process here. First of all, you're bitten by the bug. We kind of already talked about that. Working at that airport and then taking that first flight is what really kind of did it for you. Interestingly, though, I do find it very interesting that you were bit by the bug in such a way, and then you started off and then you took this massive break, which is just amazing because once you got back, it was like afterburner city.
Mm-hmm.
That's the crazy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Literally catching up for how many ever years that was of no flying.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I've thought about that a lot over the years. And so part of what happened between 83 and 2001 when I started back, it was really, an incredibly growing career. It was family. And we had 2 children that were very athletic, both traveled all around the country doing sports. And while I was working a lot of hours, I was there as much as possible for all of those sports activities. And that was a big priority in life for a long period of time. Our daughter was in Sports Illustrated when she was 10, the Faces in the Crowd thing.
No
she
kidding.
was one of the top triathletes in the United States. So that was a big part of our life. So that's why I wasn't into flying. I did spend while the kids were still young, I did get into shooting competitive skeet.
Okay.
And I mentioned earlier, I can have a bit of an obsessive personality. I can be very compulsive. And if you channel those things in the right way, it can really pay great dividends. So I was a really, really good skeet shooter in those years when I was competing. I was shooting 20,000 shells a year. And I could have been flying then instead of shooting shotguns, but that's where my interest was.
What's super interesting about that is that you are an all or nothing guy.
Yeah.
And so you shelved the aviation because you knew I can't go 100% into it. I can't do it right now.
Right.
But yet when you decided I'm turning it on in 2001, you turned it on big time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's
I did.
That's super interesting.
And sometimes I reflect.
It's into your DNA.
What would have happened if I had started back flying sooner? Well, I would have had more hours. I'm not sure I would have had the time to do it the way that I did it. So I'm flying some very different complex planes, and I think I'm a very proficient pilot, and I think I perform aerobatics at I don't do low-level aerobatics, I don't do air shows, I don't compete, but I'm very proficient at what I do. And I think I'm good at what I do because I built Kendall had a cross-country coach that said, the wider the base, the higher the peak. And I think I built a very wide base of experience in flying different airplanes over the years. Combine that with a lot of training, a lot of discipline, a lot of checklist development, and just being committed to doing things the right way. I think that's what all has contributed to making me be the best pilot I can be. I'm not the best pilot, but I'm the best pilot I can be.
Does your CFO numbers, DNA help you get into the weeds in system knowledge, checklist discipline? Like, I'm going to put every zero and I'm going to make sure everything lines up. And I bet it does, right? That's a good combination.
Yeah. And one of the things is every time my thing on my airplanes, I've mentioned it before, is avionics, but it's also checklist. And I'm big on taking, and I can do this as a Part 91 operator, I'm big on taking the factory checklist or the SIMCOM or the flight safety checklist and then sitting in the airplane and working left to right and just figuring out what is the best sequence for this checklist and how does it work best. And when you get the optimal checklist that you can have for each of the airplanes, then that's the one you use over and over and over. So it's the discipline, the same way I would have approached issues and challenges on the CFO side of the role that I spent a lot of years in. That definitely paid dividends in how I approach aviation.
That's awesome. We're going to get to that. And I love that you just brought that up. That's awesome. Okay. You're the CEO of a company that size. Is there ever the daydream you're back in the cockpit of wherever doing something? Are you able to compartmentalize, or are there those times where you just say, Lordy, if I could just be back in my right now?
You mean when I was working? Were there
Oh, yeah.
times when I was wishing I was in the cockpit?
Or I can't wait till the day's over so I can jump in the plane and go home and
Well,
relax.
I have to say, I worked for a great company and I had an incredible career. So I enjoyed what I did.
Right.
That's not to say there weren't days that
Of
were very
course.
challenging.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, early on, after I became the president of the company, Hurricane Katrina hit. And that was a big, big issue for our company because we operated the cable television system in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And so within 5 minutes of that hurricane occurring, when we were back in the office in Atlanta, I brought my direct report team together and we made 3 decisions. Number 1, we're going to protect every employee's job. Number 2, we're going to rebuild the system as quickly as possible. And number 3, we're going to create a fund to help our employees personally deal with what they need to deal with as a consequence of Katrina. Those seemed like trite decisions, but they were incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Protecting everybody's job was signaling Cox's commitment to our employees, and it around the country, people recognize that, all of our employees, all of our 80,000 employees. So it creates employee morale and commitment, and it was the right thing to do, but you also get a big return on that. Committing to rebuild the system was incredibly important. We had competitors, but because we were competing with AT&T, for instance, in New Orleans, but because we committed early to rebuild the system right away, no bureaucracy, we rebuilt, and as a consequence of that, we were up and going before AT&T was, and we had more customers after Katrina than we had before Katrina.
Is that a function of being private as opposed to public?
Yes.
That's pretty
It
cool.
allowed us to move quickly. And
Super
the last
neat.
one, which is equally important, was we created this fund for the employees. And then a few months later, we had a fire in California. And the New Orleans employees said, we want to help our employees in California.
Oh,
and we
wow.
said, this is something that's ongoing. So we created the Cox Employee, then we called it the Cox Employee Disaster Relief Fund. And we seeded it with a few $1 million. And then the Cox family found out about it. They put a significant amount of money in the fund, and then it became perpetual. Now the Cox Employee Relief Fund, we took out the word disaster because sometimes employees may need help for other reasons besides a natural disaster. Those were 3 key decisions made in 5 minutes after Katrina. So that was a pretty tough day. But to answer your question, were there ever days when I wished I was in the cockpit instead of working? I said, I don't think so, because most Fridays, particularly the last 4 or 5 years I worked, I would leave work, get in the cockpit, and fly to Florida. So that was when I got into the cockpit. The important thing there was to switch off work and switch on the cockpit.
Is it easy for you to compartmentalize?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of a pilot thing, but
you had to,
good pilot thing. You have to do that. That's true. So would you say your aviation career post 2001, was there ever a time that it got in the way of your corporate business responsibility?
No.
What about a time where your plane broke down and you didn't get to work? Was there ever any time like that?
There were a couple of occasions when the weather prohibited me getting back safely to work as early on Monday morning as I would have otherwise been there.
Gotcha.
But I wouldn't say it got in the way, because the nice thing is I always felt that, particularly when I was running the company, we all had cell phones.
Sure.
So this cell phone was with me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So even if I wasn't in the office, you could reach me.
Sure.
And so I had to make the right decision for the company, which is I don't fly in stupid weather, just to get back in the office when they can reach me anyway.
Love it. If you had to introduce yourself without any sort of job titles, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I think the way I would describe myself would be those attributes that helped me be very successful in my working career. And that is that, I think I'm a people person in the sense that I believe very strongly that your employees are the people that are your most valuable asset.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was never Mr. Hayes to my employees. I was always Jimmy. And so I would say I'm a person that cares a lot about people. I'm a person that believes in commitment, but I also believe in balance. I would tell our employees very often, I would meet with them and I say, look, I want you to be committed to this company, and I want you to work very hard, and I want you to do a great job, but I also want you to have an interest in something that you do outside of the company. I said, I don't care what it is, but you need to have a passion outside of the company, whatever it is. Otherwise, you're going to burn out. And if you burn out, you're not going to be good for us in the long run, and you're not going to be good for yourself in the long run. So I think, I was never the smartest person at Cox, but I was probably one of the better people about leading, about inspiring, about recognizing talent, providing the resources the talent needed to do their job, and stepping back far enough to let them do their job.
Yeah, I would add one more to that, and you're very approachable, very safe and approachable.
True.
Definitely that. That's something that, as me being a young person when I worked there, very comfortable person to come be around, which is great.
I'm very proud of that too.
How much of your decision making as a CEO, president, CFO, could you say could have been shaped at all by your aviation?
I actually think that my decision making in the company, regardless of my role, my decision making in aviation, neither one shaped the other. I think the way I approach life and decision making in general affected my decisions in both of those. I approach everything the same way. You said earlier, when I'm into something, I'm kind of full on. That's right. But I'm also full on in a rational, logical way. Get the facts, study the facts, make the best decision you can make. There were occasions when we had acquisitions going on, but I always, on the one hand, you could be drawn by the fact that you want to go complete this acquisition to become a bigger company. But on the other hand, if you're not financially disciplined and you don't do the acquisition at a price that makes economic sense, you may be larger, but you may be not as well off.
Yeah.
So I think studying decisions, whether they were business related or aviation related, with discipline, not with emotion, it was a very important part of what I did and continue to do. I talked to a couple of guys recently, and I may have made them a little mad. But one guy he came over and I took him flying on an aerobatic flight. He's a very successful young businessman with a family, and he's flying a nice single engine plane. It's got about 700 hours. I said, do you have your instrument rating yet? And he said, no, I do not. And I said, you really need to get your instrument rating. I said, your private pilot's ticket is the beginning entry level for you to continue to build your experience base. And then I said, what probably would have made him mad, I said, you shouldn't put your family in your plane unless you have your instrument rating.
I mean, I 1,000% agree with that statement.
And he hasn't got it yet, but the last time I talked to him, he said, I'm going to get my instrument rating, I promise. And then I had another guy call, and he had bought a PC-9. Well, I was the second civilian in the world to own a PC-9. A PC-9 is a wonderful Pilatus high-performance military aircraft, 1,100 horsepower. I can hang with the P-51 all day in a PC-9. And it has Martin Baker hot seats. But the reason it has Martin Baker hot seats is, in addition to that's the way military planes are built, you need those hot seats in a PC-9 because you can't open the canopy. In the PC-7, I can open my canopy and bail out with a parachute. The PC-7 never had hot seats. My L-39 had hot seats, but they're not particularly good ones.
Gotcha.
But I can open the canopy and bail out with a parachute in the L-39. A PC-9, you physically cannot open the canopy because of the wind flow. So if you cannot egress the cockpit, I don't think you legally can do aerobatics in a PC-9 or should do aerobatics in a PC-9. So this guy has bought a PC-9. There's some really nice ones coming into the United States now from other countries. And people are refurbishing them, putting them avionics in and paint. And that's terrific because they're great airplanes. But he hasn't updated the hot seats.
So he's not getting out of it if something happens.
He said, I'm still trying to think through whether or not I should do the hot seats. I said, there's nothing to think through. You have to do the hot seats. If you can afford to own a jet, and if you can afford to buy a PC-9 and do all of these updates, you can afford to do the hot seats. I said, it would be a very dumb decision not to.
What do you think the hesitation is? Is
money?
it just because he doesn't?
I shouldn't say that. There's two reasons. It's expensive because for civilians to maintain hot seats, it's probably going to run $20,000, $25,000 a seat on average every 2 years, roughly. I'm not sure what the number is. I used to have one, but I don't remember what the number was. But here's the second hesitation. So even when I had my PC-9, I was very hesitant to put people in the back seat who didn't have experience. So if I took you riding in the back seat of the PC-9, I had a responsibility to do a very thorough briefing in how the hot seats were, had to be used. I would remove the stringer, and so you were trained. You had enough briefing to know how to eject yourself if you had to. But my problem, the risk that people have, and why I wouldn't take people in the back of my PC-9 very often is if they're not experienced and they accidentally grab a hold of this handle thinking they need to hold on, you're going to get, that's command. There's command ejection and signal ejection, but they're going to eject themselves out of the airplane.
Guess that's not so good.
It's just it's a danger, but there are ways that you minimize that. Maybe you just don't put a lot of people in the back. You don't often take people in the back seat of your PC-9. It's a great airplane. It's a wonderful flying airplane, one of the best flying airplanes I've ever had. But I just don't think you can fly one without the hot seats being hot. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
he didn't want to do it.
That's another example of how I feel committed to good decision making, whether it's business or aviation.
Sure.
It's the same dynamic. It's the same process of how you think and get to a logical conclusion of what's right and what's wrong.
That probably follows this next question. In the cockpit, mistakes can be immediate and unforgiving, right? Did that reality change how you approach risk in business, or was there exactly the same thing in business? Is it as unforgiving and immediate in business as it is in the airplane? I forgot to put the gear down, or I stalled the airplane base to final. You're dead.
Number one, my business background really preceded my aviation background.
Sure.
Because I was in business a lot longer than I was in aviation.
But those big years of president, CEO was during that time span of flying, right?
It was. Yeah. They were doing this.
Yeah.
But I would say you definitely can there are those moments where you can make in the split moment in the business, you can make a decision that's very bad and very wrong. It may not result in somebody being killed as a consequence of that. But you can make life-changing, company-changing, culture-changing decisions in the split of the moment. So again, going back to what we talked about. So here's a great example. And you have two pilots in most commercial aviation cockpits for a reason. So you have CRM, and two pilots are better working through a process and a program and a challenge or an issue or a weather decision than one, right? So we don't like to have one single pilot cockpits that's why there are two people in the cockpit. Take the parallel to business. Use your team. Bring your team into decision making. Do not be the type of leader that says, I'm going to make the decision and you guys are going to go do it. No, that's not how I approach business. I approach business by having the best team I can have, and we together work out what the right solution was. The three decisions we made about Katrina, I didn't make those decisions. We made them as a team. And so it's the same thing. That's the parallel from business as a team to CRM. You're a team.
I got you.
And I would add one more thing. I take a lot of air traffic controllers flying. Since I retired, I probably have taken close to 300 people on aerobatic flights, and probably between 35 and 50 are air traffic controllers. And I like for them to understand where I operate, how I operate. I want to thank them for looking after me, keeping me on the squawk code while I'm doing what I do. But I also think they're part of the team. When we're in the air, the pilots are part of the team, air traffic control is part of the team, and we collectively are trying to do the best we can do together, whether it's navigating weather or navigating airspace.
That is good. Do you think pilots make better executives, or executives would make better pilots? Is there any correlation? Is there any takeaway from either direction that you go with that question?
I would modify it just a little bit and say that Some pilots will be good executives. Some executives will be good pilots, but it's not a cause and effect. I would say that the attributes that make you a good executive could be the same attributes that make you a good pilot.
But don't necessarily have to cross. Does pilot instinct clash with corporate culture in any way?
I'm going to answer this question with a real world example of what we did at Cox. Cox was real big on, I've already talked about this, teamwork and team building. And what do you have in any corporation, whether it's Cox or anywhere else? You have a myriad of personalities. And we spent a lot of time and effort doing things like studies of personalities to help people work better as a team. It's no different. Pilots, if you have a corporate flight department of 15 pilots or a commercial aviation department of hundreds or thousands of pilots, you're going to have a diversity of personalities and opinions and perspectives. And so it's the same dynamic. So what we did at Cox is I brought the people in the flight department, so there were 15 pilots and 50 people, we brought them into the same process that we used in the rest of the company in terms of personality studies, leadership development, opportunities to grow. We didn't keep the pilots over here at the hangar and the corporate people over here at the office. We brought everybody together, and they would be in some of the same leadership development classes together, because the same attributes that make you a good leader can make you a good leader in the flight department. So I think it all has to mesh together.
Right. The thing about aviation and a crew concept type thing is you have these standard operating procedures, and you can very easily compartmentalize who you are, what your personality is, who you want to vote for, what you call yourself. It doesn't matter. When you get into the cockpit, this is how you do it. I'm a robot. And it's good in a way. It's very good in a way, because you don't have to clash personality-wise when you just have a job to do. And I think my position is that's what makes air travel so safe, is just you might be going through a divorce. We compartmentalize, we come in, and we operate the same way every single time. And that's probably way more of a challenge in the business world, because there isn't a standard things that you necessarily deal with day in, day out. It's not in a box, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair observation.
So business people don't necessarily have a great safety record when it comes to general aviation. This is what is very inspiring when I talk to you, because I've known you for so many years, and you have such a deep resume and have flown so many airplanes. And you've already said during this interview how dedicated you are to checklist discipline, to training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the safety record of whoever, you can just go through the accident investigation history of people who aren't professional pilots, and it still happens in the professional pilot world. However, it's sad when you see, this baseball player does this executive does this. I just saw some executive killed a family of 4, or, the 6 of them. Do you think it's more of just a personality thing that you have down deep, that you treat it more like a profession, and you're not willy-nilly like, I'm just going to go pump in my PC-12.
Yeah.
My real business is here. Now I'm just going to go home. Because you have to bring that same type of professionalism. And what do you think about that?
Oh, that's a really tough topic, because it's one we all kind of see and experience because of the media coverage that you get when there's somebody that crashes and kills everybody in the airplane. And it hurts. I can name multiple occasions where I've known of crashes happen that should never have happened. And it's because it largely it's a combination of experience, decision criteria, knowing whether to go or not go. And it's something we always deal with I took an air traffic controller flying this weekend, and he said there's a guy that flies an L-39 in his area. I said, yeah, I know about it, and I don't know that person, but I'm not happy about how they operate.
Sure.
Because they operate sometimes without talking to ATC, and therefore they're in the corridor where traffic is coming in, and what are they doing? They're creating a bad reputation for L-39 operators.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the guy that's going to go crash, but it's a different angle of the question that you're asking. It's painful to see some of the decisions that have been made, and people that fly and end up getting their family or their employees killed. Again,
well, you mentioned the guy that didn't get his instrument rating. There's no reason for that other than, I don't know what I'd call it. I'd call it probably laziness, because it's such an opener. Getting your instrument rating is a world opener.
Yeah.
When you've got a 1,000-foot overcast and it's 200 feet thick, and you legally pop through it and you get to where you need to get, or you legally pop through it this way and it's not a 200 and a half, it's just, it's 1,500 overcast.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer in my mind. Yeah. And so many people don't want to be illegal and pop through the clouds, and then they end up burying it in.
I will say this. The general aviation safety record, notwithstanding all the things we read and hear and the horrible occasions of people dying, it still continues to get better and better and better. The safety record gets better. The quality of the aircraft gets better. The quality of the systems in the aircraft gets safer. You've got Garmin developing the systems that will bring the airplane back and land it safely, single pilots.
Insurance has made things better because it's forced people probably to have to go get hours in airplanes, right?
Yeah, generally, there's some inconsistencies. Some insurance companies require, for instance, PC-12 people to go to flight training where there's a full motion simulator. Okay, that's what I've always had to do, and I don't disagree with that. Some people I know can do in-aircraft training. I don't think that's bad. I just don't think it's solely what you should be doing. I think maybe you should do both.
Right.
Maybe you should do both, not just one of them. I still will say this: whatever I go do in aviation today, whether it's a trip to some other city or another country, or I go out and I do an aerobatic flight, when I get home, I get to the hangar and I get in my car to drive home, that's the most dangerous part of my day.
Yeah.
And it's those same airline pilots, business people, other people that are out on the road, they're part of that danger environment, and we're all in it together. It's much more dangerous. But I don't disagree. There are too many people who have the ability to buy an aircraft and put themselves beyond where they should be operating. When you transition from a single engine piston plane to a turboprop, where you can go into weather, where you have to learn the different dynamics between radar versus NEXRAD, and if you haven't built enough experience in that, the single best thing you can do is just take a second pilot. I love taking a second pilot, particularly someone who's been in the airlines, because I know how to fly the airplane. I don't need them to show me how to fly the airplane. I want their experience on analyzing weather and looking at options. Mm-hmm. And so I've always had three rules. If I'm going somewhere and there's people in the back who aren't pilots, I feel like I should take a second pilot in the go-place planes. If I'm going somewhere and the weather's, I don't mean if weather's really lousy, there's a point at which I just won't go.
Sure.
But if I'm going and there's going to be some challenging weather, I take a second pilot.
Yeah.
And the third scenario is if I'm going somewhere where the airspace is particularly complex, what would that be? Teterboro. If you're going to Teterboro, you know you're going to have 5 changes.
Yeah.
So we'll take a second pilot. Just make that workload lower.
Yeah.
And I'm primarily a single pilot guy, by the way. But there are a lot of scenarios where I always want to take a second pilot.
And that's just so smart. It's why you've gotten to where you have gotten without having issues. Those small little decisions that not necessarily saved you, but they're small little decisions along the way that were so smart.
Aviation is one of those things that you never stop learning. So when I take another pilot with me, they're always going to have a lot of experience, and if not, if that person has less experience than me, they're going to learn something from me. So you continue to learn in aviation.
Well,
And if you're
another
not
set of
willing to learn,
ears,
you shouldn't be there.
another set of eyes, even if they're inexperienced, another set of ears, another set of eyes, always wise. When you were with other executives, maybe you were at like other companies, or maybe other people that flew within Cox, or other people that flew, or even people that didn't, that knew you were a pilot, or unless you hid that from them, what they think about flying? What did other executives? What was the feedback that other executives would give when they found out? Oh wow, you fly that much, really?
Yeah. Well, I never hid my flying from anyone. I always thought it was important. There were a lot of people that some executives would be on the planes with us, and they were very afraid of flying. So I would try to help them understand, for instance, what causes turbulence, and should you be afraid of turbulence or not afraid of turbulence? I've had that conversation with many people.
I bet.
Not even necessarily connected to business. Just somebody I'll talk to casually, and they say, "Oh, I'm afraid of flying." That's, well, why? Well, let's think about it. Let's talk about it just a little bit.
That's great.
And I'll make the comment: most dangerous part of flying is getting in the car to drive to the airport.
I've had almost 3. I've had one wreck on the way to the airport. Well, really, one wreck on the way home, and just about a crash on the way to the airport, and nothing in the airplane. I mean, I hate driving to work for that reason. That is by far, is statistically and personally, terrible thing is driving on the highways, especially in Atlanta.
It's why I will not ride motorcycles anymore on the street.
What did aviation give you that business couldn't?
Well, it's just us. Business was, like, again, I had a phenomenal career. I loved my job, but aviation gave me this thing of freedom, of going to experience things and seeing things in the air that we see, that you just look at that and you say, man, that's really beautiful. That's really cool. Or seeing a volcano that's smoking from the air, that, you're far enough away, it's not erupting, but you see it. So I think opening up to, so when I traveled on business, I would go into a city and we'd go in, we'd do a meeting, we'd leave, we'd maybe have a dinner, we'd leave. But when I traveled to the 47 countries, we spent a few days in those cities, and I got to experience the culture a little bit and to realize that people around the world are largely similar.
Yeah.
They just have different perspectives, different cultures. And maybe it gives you a chance to recognize that, okay, there's not really one answer to everything that's right. There can be different perspectives that kind of get you to the same conclusion.
Did you play sports?
In high school, I was sort of always one of these people that could do a little bit of everything, but didn't particularly excel at anything in sports in high school. And then I grew up, remember the small town I grew up in? My dad was gone during the week. My mother didn't drive. She didn't have a driver's license. Wow. So I went out for football in high school, but that was 6 miles away. And I went out for football, and I would do the practice. And then when it got time to go home, I didn't have a way to get home.
Oh, wow.
So I gave up football. So no, I did not play sports on a team in high school. But I was always pretty athletic in terms of, I was a good baseball player. I could play tennis. I could play golf okay. I could do sort of anything, but I didn't really excel at any sport. Now, conversely, our kids are both excellent at sports. And my wife played basketball in high school, so she was.
Well, I only asked that question because one of the attractions I feel like that aviation gives me is because it's never, ever the same thing, kind of like a sport. You go out and you play a sport, be it basketball, tennis, golf. It's a different day every time. There's not a consistent type thing, and there's always a challenge. And that's what I like about aviation so much is you come in and today it's 0 wind and it's sunny out. And the next day it's a 25 knot crosswind. And it's almost like that hand-eye coordination type thing. It's the challenge of greasing it on, or whatever you're setting your expectation level to. That's the thing that I love about aviation. And it feels almost like it's a sport, I'm sure you feel that way in your acro that you do.
Sure.
Like,
Absolutely.
I have this goal. I want to swish this.
Yeah.
And, what did I do? My hand was off a little bit, right?
I watched the video. I mentioned the people I've taken flying. I always do a video for them. And I watched that video to critique my own personal flying. And I can always tell if my 4-point rolls are off a degree or two, or if they're not. And I was briefing someone on the Cloverleaf this weekend explaining I'm going to try to cross this intersection 4 times, but I probably won't make all 4. And the controller said, well, we really won't know if you make it or don't make it. I said, no, I'll tell you.
That's great. That's great. If there was one cockpit rule that every boardroom should adopt, what would it be?
Listen. Listen to the engine. Listen to the other person in the cockpit. Listen to your board members. Listen to your whatever. Listen to what's happening. That just listen means be aware of what's going on. What's going on in the boardroom, what's going on in the company, what's going on in the economy, what's going on in the cockpit, what's happening in the engine, what's happening in the weather. Just listen, be aware.
I love that. What a great answer. If a young executive told you that they were passionate about flying, but they were afraid that it was going to hurt their career, what would you tell them?
I would say there's no reason it should hurt their career. And in fact, it perhaps might help their career. Remember my comments about you need to have a passion outside of work, whatever that happens to be. Otherwise, you may burn out. So if it's their spiritual cleansing and their brain cleansing and their body cleansing, so that when they come back to work on Monday, they're fully charged and ready to go, it's actually going to help their career.
Do you think aviation ever taught you anything that business couldn't or didn't?
I don't know. They're just different dynamics in that sense. I learned a lot in aviation I could never have learned in business, and vice versa. I just don't know that there's much of a crossover there. I've already talked about the people and CRM and listening and stuff like that. So I think that's all part of that equation.
Would you agree or disagree that being a pilot made you a better listener?
No. I think you can have pilots that aren't good listeners.
For sure.
I think you can have business people that aren't good listeners.
Oh, there's no doubt about that.
If you're a good listener, you'll be better at both.
There you go. Looking back, would you change how your aviation career and business career blended?
No, I wouldn't. I took the sabbatical from aviation for a long time for valid reasons. And I can never look back or never retrade that. I'm glad I started back flying because it opened up a whole new avenue. The reality is, I think flying will keep me living longer.
Yeah.
Because when you retire, one of the things I retired at 61 because I needed to provide time for my successor to be in the job running the company before the 4th generation family came back in. But regardless of when you retire, you cannot retire and be inactive. You have to find things that physically and mentally engage you to keep you healthy and robust in retirement. So regardless of when I would have retired, what aviation does is it keeps my brain sharp, whether it's building computers and flight simulators, or it's learning systems of different aircraft, or flying complexity, or doing aerobatics, or working on airplanes. It keeps me mentally engaged. So that's got to be good for my brain and my longevity. And if I'm going to go, so on my birthday, I go out and I do my birthday aerobatics. Mm-hmm. So on my 70th birthday, I did 70 continuous upside down maneuvers. On my 71st, I did 71. On my 72nd, I did 72. On my 73rd, I did 73. And this year I'll do 74. It's not that hard, but for not many people will go out or can go out and do 74 continuous upside down aerobatic maneuvers without stopping.
Sure.
But what so it doesn't mean I'm a Superman, but it keeps me I have to be more physically fit in order to endure those continuous G's for that long of a period of time. So it's my way of saying not only mentally, but physically flying slows down my aging process.
How old do you feel?
My wife says she has 3 children, Jimmy, Matt, and Kendall.
I love that. If you could design the perfect CEO training program, would any of it happen in an airplane?
So reality is not many companies let their CEOs be pilots. Now, I'm not even talking about be pilots for the company, but a lot of companies don't let their CEOs pilot private planes, period, because they feel it's too big of a risk. Personally think that's a little bit of a shallow perspective.
Considering the driving thing
Yes.
that we talked about.
It's totally.
Right.
And even if they're riding with a chauffeur driver, they're still in a car
Sure.
with a bunch of crazy people on the road. So I'm not sure aviation per se would contribute to the training regimen of a CEO, but I will say that things that make you good in both, there's a lot of commonality of those traits. That's what I would say.
Love it. If you could distill everything aviation gave you into one leadership principle, what would it be?
Discipline.
Nice. Did aviation ever help you close a deal or establish a relationship in business that helped your company in any way?
Definitely aviation helped the company a lot, because as we built up the flight department, we were able to get our people out when key acquisitions, when growth was happening in the cable world. Another scenario, we were launching, we were the first cable television company to have both telephone, high-speed internet, and video in one platform. But one particular weekend we had, I forget all the particulars, but we were having some back office issues with the computers, which was sort of central to everything that we did. And the CIO of the cable division, Chief Information Officer, called me. He reported to me. I was a CFO then. And he said, Jimmy, we really need to get new servers out to all of our cable systems. Can we use the company planes? It was a Saturday night. It was first Saturday in December. I remember it because it was the night of our Christmas party. I called Jim Kennedy, who was our chairman. I said, Jim, we need to use the planes because this is why. And he said, do it. So we dispatched all of our planes with engineers and computer equipment around the country, and we were back up and going in no time.
Wow.
And, so that was a key difference. So aviation played a big role in helping Cox be better, be the best it could be.
And Cox had a flight department since what year?
1940-ish. So going way back, aviation began with Cox used, we had a reporter in the sky in Dayton, Ohio, reporting to radio. This is before the flight department started.
Okay.
So the early days of radio, call it the late 30s or 40s, we had someone in the sky doing some news reporting. Not traffic, because there really wasn't any traffic back then. But the founder of our company, Governor Cox, his son had a Beech Staggerwing. It was November 1039. And they sold that plane, and we bought the first company plane, which was a Twin Beech, around 1940. And that began the flight department per se, even though it was largely for the family to go on initially, maybe a few newspaper executives. I found some old papers that I was going through one day, and it was in the 40s, and somebody had written a letter saying the flight from Dayton to Miami was delightful. The plane was very comfortable, but the chicken was a little tough. I found another paper where a war began. We had written to the government to request approval to be able to purchase a reciprocating propeller for, I think it was the Twin Beech. And I remember I spoke at the NBAA, and I used this as an example, talking about the history of Cox's flight department. And I labeled, be careful what you ask for. The answer was, they approved the propeller, but then they came back in the War Department and took our plane.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So when we came back, we started with
Thank you very much.
a Learstar, a Lodestar, whichever one came first. I'm not sure. Then later on, the Gulfstream 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6. Pretty cool. All right, back to this question. If you've thought anything, what is the most humbling moment in the business world you've had, and did flying in any way prepare you for that?
I don't have anything. Got to leave that one out.
Was there any sadness of quitting flying in 83 for a time span before it just kind of went away, or was it easy to cut that cord? Like, did you miss it for a while, but you kind of said, all right, I'm putting my family first, business first?
I don't recall, but what I would think is that I had so much going on, I didn't have time to even reflect on it.
Yeah.
And I had wound down. I mean, I started out fast and strong,
Yeah.
getting the license in no time, buying an airplane, then the 182. And then, it was expensive. Again, and I was starting out my career.
Sure.
So then we sold the 182, and for the next 2 or 3 years, I was just leasing a plane to fly every now and then. So what happens? I was in that category of people where I wasn't flying often enough.
Sure.
And so I sort of weeded myself off of it and realizing, there's really no time to fly. I don't have the time to fly. I don't have the money to fly. And what flying I'm doing, I'm not at a level of safety and proficiency. So let's just put this aside. And I didn't necessarily know that I would be coming back. But over the years, as I was around Cox's flight department, that definitely began to kind of rekindle an interest in flying in aviation, but still it wasn't right. It wasn't the right time. I had other priorities in life. And then when I finally did those 2 flights I mentioned with you, that definitely rekindled the flame with
That's pretty neat.
jet fuel.
Did you ever fail a check ride? And what did it teach you?
I've never failed a check ride, but the closest time I came to not passing was formation flying.
Okay.
Now, formation flying as a civilian pilot is one of the hardest things you'll ever learn. I think it's much harder than aerobatics. First of all, I spent my life trying to avoid being close to other airplanes.
Sure.
TCAS, ADSB, looking around. And I never will forget when I started learning formation flying. First, we started with 2-ship, and that was pretty easy. It's just 2 airplanes. And then the first time I was in a 4-ship, and I've got lead, and I'm number 2, and all of a sudden 3 and 4 are coming in. I said, oh my gosh, where are all these airplanes coming from? But learning to fly formation was, I probably have done about 100 hours of it now.
Okay.
And it gets better with time. And what you have to do is you have to be very smooth. And I'm a very smooth pilot, but you have to make very small incremental movements in your throttle. If you add a little bit, you take a little bit out. And every plane's a little different in terms of how you fly it. I did a lot of formation flying in the T6 and a little bit in the S&J, but the hardest check ride I had was the formation flying. I remember one guy saying, I took off, and this was before I was doing my check ride, but it was one of the senior guys in the group, and we were taking off, and he says, it was my 4th flight of the day, which is a really bad idea. Doing 4 formation flights in one day just wears you out. And it's hot summertime, and you're sweating in the World War II planes. And I remember this guy saying, Jimmy, what's wrong with you? You're just too tired. You shouldn't be doing this. I said, I'm fine. Just quit yelling at me.
Really?
Yeah. And the other thing that's hard in formation flying is, and it's again what you get in the military training that you don't get in civilian training, is military training is very disciplined in terms of the brief and the debrief. And it's you got to check your attitude at the door, and people are going to tell you like it is what you did well and what you did wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing a debrief of your 4-ship, and you've also got a person in the back of each of the planes, there's 8 people doing a debrief. And some people would feel like they had to criticize something because that's what the debrief was about. Well, I don't really buy that. I'm okay for you to criticize something I didn't do well,
Right.
but don't feel you have to criticize just because you're debriefing and therefore go find something.
Sure.
So I had a little trouble with that mentality of the formation flying and the briefing and debriefing.
That's good.
I had another guy, and he's a friend of mine. I've taken him flying aerobatics. I'll tell you a story on that. In fact, I'll tell you that first. I took him flying in the L-39. He's an airline pilot. And he came down, I took him flying, and we go out and we do the acro, and I think we did all the maneuvers. I can't remember. I always do a full flight brief on what we're going to do with a full understanding that I'll check in with you after every maneuver, and if you don't feel good, we don't have to keep going. There's nothing magical about how many we do. but I'm going to give you a chance to experience the full series of maneuvers that I do. And we were coming back, and he says, well, Jimmy, you got me. I said, what do you mean? I said, no, we did almost everything. I do remember now. We didn't do quite all. He said, no, I got sick. And he said, I threw up in the bag. And he said, I've been flying since I was 16 years old, and I've never gotten sick in an airplane. And then he said, you're not going to tell anybody, are you? And I said, no, I'm not going to tell anybody until we land, and I'm going to tell pretty much everybody that knows you. So we were debriefing a flight, and he's a much more experienced formation pilot than I was, and I was number 2.
Okay.
And he was number 3. So normally, lead would set up, and 2 would join on the inside, and 3 and 4 would come in and swing out to the right side of the lead and the right side of the number 3. If 2 stagnates coming in, and 3 and 4, they have a rule. They can't come in until I'm in position. But if they've got a lot of energy, they call it smash, coming in, and I stagnate, then they may have to do an underrun where they just put their wings flat and shoot under, and they call an underrun. And he called, and so I did a flight, and I was really, it's right before I got my check ride. I was really happy at how I got into position on number 2. We go on the ground, we get on the ground, and first thing lead says, Jimmy, you did a good job, but you got right into position. This guy that got sick in the plane, he comes up and he says, you really messed me up, and I was coming in and I was hot and you stagnated. I said, I didn't stagnate. I said, you had too much smash. That was your fault.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, that was the closest, the formation stuff was the closest I probably ever would have come to not passing a check ride.
Okay. Was there ever a time, because of a mistake you made, you truly thought you might not survive the flight?
No.
Never.
No.
Good.
No.
Tell me a couple stories of moments that made a big impact on you, safety-wise. Whether it was an emergency that you could have had or anything across those 40 different types of airplanes. Impactful stories that really stayed with you.
Different stories that kind of I remembered over time. We were in Jordan, the country of Jordan. And I think it was Aqaba is where we were. And I was in a PC-12, and I was holding short of the line, and the air traffic controller said, November 825, Mike Kilo, position hold behind landing traffic. And at that moment, there's a plane coming across in front of me. And as soon as that plane passes, I start to add power and move up. And another American voice comes on and says, American PC-12, stop. So I stopped. And they said, here, when they say position and hold behind landing traffic, they don't mean the plane that's landing right now. They mean the next plane is coming. I said, I've never heard that before. He says, no big deal. You're fine. I was slightly over the whole short line. He said, you're fine. Everything's cool. But I remembered that, and it just is a kind of a reflection of communication and making sure you understand, what they mean. When
I think that was pretty close on their timing to have a guy here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to
now. Totally.
Yeah.
It was a little unclear.
That's a little close.
I remember that as
probably technically correct, but a little close.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that one sticks out.
Mm-hmm.
You never had any? Did you have any engine issues in any of the airplanes that you've flown, other than that false indication?
No engine issues. Probably the other thing that pops in my mind that I remember to this day is I kind of mucked up a go-around in the Citation in Columbus, Ohio, in the weather. And it was in the CJ2 Plus, as a matter of fact, the Fusion. And I was new to it. And I had a second pilot with me.
Okay.
But I did a go-around, but I didn't couple right. And so I gave up on the approach. I said, I'm going to go around. And Tower said, why are you going around? I said, because I didn't get coupled on the approach properly. I'm going to call it an unstable approach. So I did go around. And I was in the weather. But so I just stayed on the bars, climbed out. And it was not unsafe, but it was not fulfilling.
Yeah.
It was sort of not at the level I thought I should have been.
You felt like you learned something from it?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Ever any aerobatic issues? As much aerobatic flying as you've done, either a messed up maneuver or anything where you're just like, whoa, I'm not going to do that again?
I went into a spin in the PC-9 one day. I pulled up and I was going to do vertical rolls, and I didn't have enough energy, and it dropped into a spin. But that was a failed maneuver. But you just go right to number one, I'm always at altitude, so you have plenty of time to recover, and number two, you do your normal spin recovery training. But I remembered that particularly after that, just pay more attention to your.
You've been into Oshkosh a ton of times, right?
Not a ton. I've flown into Oshkosh half a dozen times.
Okay. I've not been in there. I mean, I've been there as a 12-year-old just driving in. Actually, maybe we did fly in there. Now that I think about it, I was so young. I was in a Bonanza. Maybe I did. I don't even recall it. But that's one of the supposedly not only the busiest airport in the world for that time span, I guess, but dangerous.
Head on a swivel. So number one, air traffic control does a phenomenal job getting you in and out. They really do a great job. First time I flew into Oshkosh, I flew in a TBM, single pilot, by myself, and not the greatest idea. It's good to have a second person in the cockpit, even if they're not a pilot, just to be looking around. But if you go in on an IFR flight plan, it's a little bit easier than going in VFR, so that wasn't too bad.
Okay.
First time I flew the S&J into Oshkosh, I did not have my formation ticket. I'd been at the clinic training, and we flew from Dubuque, Iowa to Oshkosh. Okay, so now I'm flying my S&J into Oshkosh. So what happens in that case is there were 50 airplanes. And everybody who had the formation ticket, which was everybody except for a couple, were in formation. So they're coming in as in their standard formation. They'll break the echelon and they'll do the break. Then there was 3 of us that were stingers. I think there were 47 of us. There were 11 four-ships and 3 stingers. So there's 48, 49, and 50, and I'm number 49. So we've done the full briefing. We're going to go over going over there was a piece of cake. I just follow. I'm the stinger. I'm following the plane in front of me. And we've done the brief where, the 4 ships are going to break into the echelon so they can do their brakes properly, and they're going to brake, and then we're going to come in after them. And then we, as we're getting there, their traffic controllers say, you can't come in 4 ship, you got to go single ship. So all of a sudden now everything's out the door. Wow. I'm still single ship. I was single ship.
Your entire brief for all those airplanes.
We had to do S turns to slow down. So now I'm number 49 out of 50 T6s. So I've got to keep up with where the plane is in front of me, so I know when to land. Otherwise, I have no clue. So what I did is I just followed that plane. Wherever he went, I went. And when he turned to the runway, because they don't talk to you individually, they talk to lead. And then all the other planes come in successfully. So I followed him right in, and add to that, it was a blustery, crosswind blowing kind of day. And when you land at Oshkosh, you land on one of 3 dots. And they don't want you to put the tail down right away. They want you to fly down toward the end of the runway and then put your tail down. But, I made the decision. We had roughly a 15-knot crosswind, which is quite a bit for a T6. I said, first and foremost, I'm going to land this plane safely, and then I'm going to keep the plane on the runway. So when I got on the runway and I got in the crosswind, I put the tail down, and I just slowed down and went on in. Everything was fine. One of the 50 planes went off the runway into the grass.
Really?
He was fine. He just went off the grass. He was fine.
Because of the winds. Because of the winds. Wow. Gosh. What was the most difficult period you've had in aviation? In other words, maybe a lost medical, an incident, something that tested you in your aviation career of 60 years.
50 years.
50 years.
50 years. Definitely last year, melanoma, right cheek. I grew up in the South. I didn't wear sunscreen near as much as I should. I was outside for all kinds of activities and skeet shooting and boating and swimming and I have fair skin. And so I've always had a number of basal and squamous cells but I had one tiny little spot here, smaller than the top of a pencil eraser.
Wow.
That was flat, and it turned out to be a melanoma cell. But they still said it's fine. It's very shallow, no big deal. But they wanted me to go to somewhere like MD Anderson or Emory. I chose Emory because that's Atlanta for the surgery. The surgeon said, "This is a piece of cake. We'll do this, no problem." It turned out to be a little deeper than what they originally thought after the surgery was completed. Still, I'm good medically. They got good margins on it. And when we started the process, I told the doctor, I said, okay, there's two things, life and living. Life means keep me around for my grandkids. Living means don't mess up my FAA medical, because that's living. So now all of a sudden, this is a little deeper. And I said, geez, I need to kind of focus on life. And once he told me I was fine, then I said, okay, we're back to living. So how are we going to fix the FAA medical? Because it was more than 0.75 millimeters deep, it required a special issuance. Well, you never know in the game of special issuances if it's going to be a high risk or a low risk or an easy one or a hard one. And the prospect of losing my medical for something that's pretty minute was very stressful.
I
so
bet.
for a couple of weeks, I was running out pretty tight on it. So what we did is we went over and above what I thought I had to do for the FAA. It wasn't particularly clear, and I didn't want to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I've got this melanoma. What do I do? So on a no-name basis, we talked to the FAA and made the decision to do a brain MRI and a full-body scan, CT scan, which in and of itself is scary because you say, okay, the melanoma's okay, but what else are you going to find? So that was a little frightening. And then we get those results back, and they're all good. They're clear. So then we go back to the FAA on a no-name basis with the results, and they say, this is good. We're happy with this. And then I get my special issuance. So that little short period of time was very troubling. And it's the most angst I've ever had on anything in my life. I've really never been sick in my life.
Yeah.
And to deal with that and all the uncertainty that goes with it and the prospect that I might not be able to fly for a really invalid reason. You know, it's different. If I have melanoma full on and it's spread and that sort of thing, then I'm not going to fly. I'm going to take care of my life.
Sure.
But I didn't have that. I had a tiny little spot that got removed early. And yeah, I have to go back to the skin doctor more often now than I did before, which I do, but it was a very stressful several weeks period of time.
All right, so that begs the following question. Flying's taken away. Where do you point your energy? You're healthy. Your mind obviously wants to, you're building simulators, you're flying all the time.
You're asking me if I couldn't fly my airplanes, what would I do?
That's right.
I fly the simulators.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'd probably build more simulators.
You start a simulator company.
Yeah, I have 6. Why not a couple more? There will be a point in life where I can't go upside down as much as I do now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the future holds.
Sure.
None of us do. But I hope I have a long runway to be able to do this for a number of years to come. But I'm sure there will be some period of time where I will back off from doing continuous consecutive aerobatic maneuvers, pulling, 4.5 Gs for 30 minutes straight, and I'll do less. And then maybe I'll go to barrel rolls, and aileron rolls, or maybe I'll go to straight and level flying in the same airplanes. And that's okay. But that period's going to come. It's just not today.
Right.
I just don't know when it is. And by the same token, in the Go Place plane, there'll be a period of time where I will transition where I'll always have a second pilot. I'm not there today. I have a second pilot sometimes.
When you get to the point, do you see hanging up flying completely, or do you see yourself flying in the sim as a however old individual? Just staying sharp. Doing something with your mind. What do you see?
I can't see any reason why I wouldn't continue to fly the simulator, provided I have the ability to do that.
Sure.
I mean, who knows what will have happened that caused me not to be able to fly?
Right.
We just don't know.
Right.
I'm in excellent health right now, notwithstanding that melanoma we had with last year. But I really am hopeful I'm going to do this for a long period of time, and then maybe do the sims for a period after that. And by the way, if I couldn't fly my airplanes, that doesn't mean I would sell the PC-12. Why would I? I just had to hire a pilot because it's still a mode of transportation for my wife and I to go visit our grandkids, to go to our lake house.
Sure.
That's not going to change.
Sure.
And so that's why I focused on building this PC-12 as well as I could with new interior, new avionics, new engine, new paint, new lights, and make it because I think this is my last go place plane I'll buy in my flying life. So I will just extend the runway a long way with it.
I love it. What a great airplane. You kind of touched on a little bit talking about the PC-12 and your world trip that you went on. My question was, what did that experience teach you that you didn't know before going into it? You kind of touched a little bit just on the culture of people and so forth, but is there anything outside of that, say, even from an aviation perspective, even line up and wait behind the landing aircraft, but is there anything else aviation-wise over that 76-day trip that you took that was like, light bulb, something went on?
There is. But before I left for that trip, I had, over the few years up until that point, I had contemplated, should I move to a jet? The Phenom 100 was out. The Citation Mustang 510 was out. And I had test flown both of those. And I had convinced myself, no, I do not need to move to a jet because the PC-12, prior to that, I had 3 TBMs. They'll satisfy everything I need. It fits the bill. And I said, okay, I'll fly the PC-12 around the world, which I'm really glad I did because it's a bigger accomplishment to fly a PC-12 at 25, 26, 27, 28,000 feet around the world than it is to fly the Citation, which I've done several times too, to Europe at 45,000. That's a piece of cake. You get up above the weather and you go. PC-12, you got to negotiate and think about weather and deal with it. I remember I had to do 3 present position holes going into Istanbul, Turkey in the PC-12. However, on that trip, there was a TBM, a PC-12, a Twin Commander, a Citation Mustang, and an older Citation. And we had our order because I had Laura Zara flew with me as a second pilot, and there were other family members on the plane with me from time to time and friends, and we were very efficient. So we had this order where I would usually get ready and prep and take off first, and then the jets would take off, and then the other 2 turboprops would take off, and we would get to the jets would pass me, and I would always take pictures and videos of them up above me passing and descending above me, and then I'd land, and then the 2 turboprops would land behind me, and we'd refuel and we'd do it all again. But I came back from that trip and I said, okay, other than my family now being retired, flying is my most important passion. Do I want to, when I reach that point where my flying is over, am I going to have a big regret that I never got a type rating? And I decided the answer was yes. So then I called and I bought talked to the sales guy and I bought the Citation CJ3 Plus. It was a period of time I hit the market perfectly. There was a brand new one coming down the assembly line. I got to pick out the colors and I moved to the Citation. So that was one of the awakenings that I got. And I flew it 5 years. I flew the CJ2 Plus 2 years. So that's 7 years in the Citations and did several crossings back and forth. So I'm really glad I did it. And I enjoy flying those planes. Look, it's cool to be at 45,000 feet because I'm above all the airliners. I don't have to worry about traffic. We're above weather. It's nice and smooth up there. It's very efficient up there. And it's nice. I like it a lot. But it's also very expensive. I don't have a business write-off for my aviation use. So it sort of became impractical. I can operate the PC-12 for a lot less money than the Citation.
I'm sure. Do you think that this flying, this working out, everything, this is kind of an obvious question, but I want to hear it out of your mouth. Being 73 and doing what you do, is it keeping you young?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, there's just no doubt about it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean,
physically, mentally, everything.
So maybe I've got good genes and I've always been pretty healthy and I might be doing some other activities that would keep me healthy. But aviation forces me to be healthy,
Right.
mentally and physically, particularly because I'm doing the aerobatics. You can fly in the cockpit and not necessarily be physically healthy.
Sure.
But if you're doing the aerobatics, I'm doing, it's a workout. It
Yeah.
really is.
There's something to be said when you look at somebody like the Berkshire Hathaway guy that works to 95 or 96 at work, physical, mental, not just droning day in and day out on the golf course.
Yeah.
Does for you.
Sure. And the other thing, kind of relatedly, is everybody's different. That gets back to this question of what age should pilots retire? It all depends.
Sure.
Everybody's different.
Yeah.
Whether you're an airline pilot or a corporate pilot or a Part 91 pilot, when you should retire really I know there are rules right now for when airliners or maybe Part 135 guys have to retire. I'm not sure the rules are correct. I mean, I think it really depends on the circumstances. Not every 65-year-old pilot is the same. Not every 67-year-old pilot's the same. Not every 73-year-old pilot's the same. I know a lot of people once they reach the 70s, they can't keep insurance. I made it a point a few years ago to bring my underwriters, whom I haven't changed underwriters for years.
Okay.
Even though I could have gone to other companies, perhaps for less money, I tried to build a long-term relationship, and I made it a point to bring them down here a few years ago to say, okay, you know my account, you've never met me,
Sure.
and you don't know my airplanes. So I flew to Atlanta with a second pilot in the citation, flew them down, gave them a tour of my airplanes, talked to them about my approach to training, flight briefs. And I say, if I use the word aerobatics, you immediately think risk. I'm going to tell you it makes me a better pilot. And I talked to them about where I fly, how I do the flight briefings. And it was a really good conversation. And we had dinner that night. And I said, okay, if you're really comfortable, would you like to do an aerobatic flight with me tomorrow? Both of them said yes. I took both of them on an aerobatic flight. They did great. Went in the PC-7. They each did about 25 maneuvers. I did a video for them, flew them back to Atlanta. And a few days later, I got an email from the senior underwriter, and it said, effectively, he said this: Jimmy, I've been doing this a long time, over 25 years. I've seen a lot in aviation. The fact that we were willing, and we were very comfortable with you early on in our conversations, the fact that we were willing to fly an aerobatic flight said a lot. But the reality is, I don't need to do another aerobatic flight with anyone ever again, because you set the bar so high, there's no point. And he said, the bottom line is we're comfortable insuring you as long as you're comfortable flying.
That was really a trophy right there, man.
And that has continued to prove to be the case. I just got the renewal on one of my planes this week. No change in premium, no change in liability.
That's awesome.
So, I'm lucky. I'm really lucky in that regard.
Well, you took the right steps to kind of put that in the right direction, though.
I think they made a good decision, because I do approach my flying very, 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 very disciplined.
Yeah.
It'd be thrilling to do low-level stuff. I know it would be. But it's just, the return's not there. The risk-reward relationship is not there. So it may be thrilling to do low-level aerobatics, but it's very rewarding to do high-level aerobatics. I love it. I watch my videos sometime. I'll go out, I take people flying, and I do a video, and I cut it down, and I put music behind it, and I can watch a video over and over and over again of my flights and say, man, I'm really lucky. That it's cool to watch. It's cool to experience. It's just sort of I said this earlier, it's sort of a spiritual experience. And it takes you to a different place that nothing else takes you to, in my opinion.
I love it. I love that. I'm going to skip a question here because it's exactly what you said. So my own family sometimes will give me grief about my love for aviation, my constant talk of it. I can get on the phone with a buddy and time can go by quickly, very quickly. That passion, that spirituality, just what you mentioned, part of getting bit by that aviation bug, it seems as just bury me at an airport, right? Just bury me there. If that's going to be how it's supposed to be, Does flying now for you, because you kind of are an 8 to 5er with your flying? I mean, it's what you do day in and day out. You work on it. That's your job.
It's more like 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., yeah.
There you go. Does your wife just understand that's just what your DNA is?
Nah, I'm really lucky. Lynn, I've been married 40, this year will be 48 years. And so it's terrific. She always understood that work came first. She put up with a lot of excessive hours at work. But here's the secret. Lynn is a competitive ballroom dancer.
Okay.
She has her passion. I have my passion. And when I retired, she said, "You're no longer the CEO. You're now my person." So when she needs something, I have to be there for her. It might be flying her to a ballroom competition. It might be driving her to get her hair done. I don't know. Whatever she needs, I'm there for her. But she understands. So what I do, during the week, she has her routine. The morning, she's getting ready to practice. The afternoon, she's practicing. And she doesn't tend to like to go out to dinner during the week very much. I'm a little bit more social. I like to go have an early dinner, sit at the bar. I can go sit at the bar and have dinner and talk to the people or talk to the bartenders, all of whom I know, and not feel like I'm alone. So I'm cool for not to go out with me during the week. And by the time she gets home, I'm home, and we sit in the chair and we watch these Prime Video, primarily non-English speaking with English subtitle detective series over in Europe. And we watch that for an hour or two, and then I go to bed at 8:30, and I get up at 4:30 every day and start the process again. The only difference is somebody asked me what days I'm here. I said, I'm only here on days that end in Y. And that's true. But on the weekends, I still come in early, and Lynn will sleep in a little bit, but by the time she's up and about, I'll be home by 11 or run the Publix and get the groceries by 11 or 12. On the weekends, I'm generally home. This past weekend, I flew an air traffic controller and his significant other on aerobatic flights on Saturday, so we couldn't start until about 1, so I was later getting home than normal. But in general, I'm here 5 to 5, and she totally understands and gets it and frankly supports it.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool for her to be able to be flown by you to her passion if she has a dance competition somewhere. And here you're doing what you want to be doing, taking her to something she wants to be doing. That's a good marriage right there.
But she never sits up front.
Always sits in the back.
She's never sat in the L-39. She's flown in the PC-7 with me 3 times, maybe 4, maybe because the PC-12 was in maintenance. And but she likes to sleep in the airplanes. So she gets in the back and she goes to sleep.
That's awesome. Would you say when you retired at 61 till now, it has been the way you envisioned it?
When I retired at 61, I was pretty heavily committed into aviation for sure. I was committed to doing the round-the-world trip. I was flying 3 different airplanes, so I knew flying was going to be a big part of it. Probably thought I was going to be doing flying, golf, boating. But what I do is I do flying, and flying. I don't do much golf unless the kids are in town to play, in which case I'll play with them. I do boating when the grandkids are in town. So it's become a little more one-dimensional than what I probably would have expected retirement to be. It's one of those things where I've got to do this while I can.
Sure.
I can always play golf. I maybe can't fly as many years as I perhaps could play golf, or I always could go boating. But there are other limitations that limit how many
especially
years
aerobatics.
you can fly. Yeah.
Especially aerobatics.
And it gets back to, it's just what I love doing.
Sure.
Yeah, I do a lot.
Well, you can't be accused of not making up for the time that you lost from 83 to 01.
I don't look back about anything, but that doesn't mean I need to slow down. So I just keep my pedal to the metal and do as much as I can.
That's awesome. It's hard to pick an airplane because there's those seasons of life that you fly particular airplanes. There's the mission. There's the aerobatic airplane versus the PC-12 that gets you from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had to pick an airplane, just one, you had to only own one airplane, what would it be?
It's
kind of an unfair question.
Of any airplane or of the ones I have today?
Of any airplane. I mean, of the ones that you are within your realm of,
Yeah, sure.
what you have to pick one.
If I was only going to have one airplane, it's hard because do I want it to be one I can take the family on, take Linda or competitions on with or without me as a pilot? If I just stratify the question just a little bit and say, okay, which plane would I enjoy the most just continuing to fly, even by myself, not doing aerobatics? It's probably going to be the PC-7.
Really?
Yeah, because it's such a simple aircraft that flies great. It's air conditioned. It's very safe. It's a Pilatus. It's built like a tank. It's got an incredible gear. You can do grass landings with it. It's got a PT6 engine, which was overhauled 400 hours ago. It's got avionics. It has no bad habits. It's just a nice, safe, easy airplane to pull out, fuel up, and go. It's the plane that I probably would be the last one I would sell.
Wow.
Now, if you say, if I just want to have one airplane, but the caveat is I want to be able to continue to travel with my family or take my Lynn somewhere or have the ability to have another pilot take Lynn, then the PC-12 is terrific. It's a phenomenal airplane too. I love that plane.
The PC-7, how fast is it? Like general cruise speed?
200, 210 knots.
Okay.
210, 220.
And what's it burn?
300 pounds, 45 gallons an hour.
Okay. Huh. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. All right. Finally, is there anything to aspiring aviators, aspiring executives, 16-year-olds, that you'd say you could go back in time, almost talk to yourself, bam, what would you tell them?
Those are two different avenues of questions that really sort of have the same answer. Commitment. Number one, always be committed to whatever it is that you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you're committed to flying, that commitment means commit to training, commit to continuous learning, commit to disciplines, actions, whether it's a checklist or minimums, personal minimums, have a commitment here. If you're on the business side, be committed to what it is you're doing. If it means digging deeper, studying more, analyzing more, be willing to put in that effort to analyze the alternatives you need to study. You know, you can almost have a checklist on business like you can have a checklist in aviation. But it comes back to if you're committed to whatever it is you're doing, mm-hmm. your degree of success is much higher than it is if you're not committed. Commitment can cover a lot of other shortcomings. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but if you're more committed, you'll be more successful.
Where do you think you learned that? Did you learn it from your parents? Did you learn it from anybody? Or was it just something that did you have any mentors?
I think life is a continuous learning opportunity, and commitment is something that it develops over time. So when I went off to college, I wasn't particularly committed. I partied too much and didn't study enough. However, there's two things I'll say about that. My first 2 years, I took Biology 101 and I made a 79. Hey, that's not going to get me in med school. So I went to the teacher. There were 600 people in Biology 101, 300 in one class and 300 in the second class. I went to the professor and I said, hey, I really can't make a 79, which is a C, and go to med school. I need to, would you change this to a B if I make an A in Biology 102? So he said, yes, I will. So the second quarter, I was committed to Biology 102. So I went to both lectures, and out of 600 people, I made the second highest grade in the class. I went back to the teacher and I said, you remember our conversation? He said, yes, I do. And he changed the C to a B. And and then I fell off the edge in German and calculus, and that's when I had the summer experience at Ford Motor Company where I changed to business. But what I learned from that is that's where I began to learn commitment. I was committed in Biology 102. I just wasn't committed to the overall goal.
Sure.
So if I'd been as committed to the overall goal, I might have gone down the medical path. But I learned that I could negotiate.
You sure did.
And I learned how to commit because I committed to 102. So when I came over to business and I took the accounting class and I enjoyed it, then I applied commitment to passion. That's a pretty good combination.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It
What
was. I'm incredibly lucky. So I may be committed. I may be compulsive, and I think those personalities have developed over time. But I'm really lucky to have been in the right place at the right time in a lot of respects. You know, drawing from Gordon Kilgore, who caused me to change to business, was luck, being in the right place at the right time, having the opportunity to, work hard and have jobs to pay my way through college. So I came out of college with no debt to be able to go get my pilot's license was a little bit of luck in having those summer jobs. Going to work for Cox was definitely luck. I could have not gone there. Governor Cox ran for president of the United States in 1920. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was his vice presidential running mate. Wilbur and Orville Wright campaigned for him. We had pictures of Governor Cox and the Wright brothers going down the street in Ohio campaigning.
No kidding.
But you know what? He lost that election to Warren Harding, another newspaper man. So I'm a little lucky that he lost that election.
Yeah.
If he had been president of the United States, he wouldn't have built Cox. And I wouldn't have had that incredible job. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do all these great things I've done in aviation.
It's pretty wild when you talk about that, huh?
Life is a compilation of experiences, opportunities, luck, circumstances, dedication. It's just, you never know where it's going to go. And everybody can find a path. They just have to be patient. It doesn't all come at the same time.
I love it. Well, we've covered a lot. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you are like, why haven't you asked that question? Is there anything you want to add? You're talking to executives, you're talking to pilots.
Oh, no, I think we've covered all the philosophical things like that. You might ask me, do I plan to fly to any other countries before I stop flying?
Okay.
And that's a really good question. And it's one I don't know the answer to. I'd like not to stop at 47. And I haven't been out of the U.S. as a pilot since COVID. I've been on Delta out of the U.S.
Okay.
A couple of times. But I'm contemplating doing another trip. It's just a little harder now because our son and daughter and their families can't really participate much in those trips because they have small children at home and they have things going on in their lives. Lynn has her ballroom dancing going on. So it makes it a little harder to do those trips. I thought about doing an air journey trip that I wouldn't do around the world again. It was a phenomenal trip.
Okay.
And I only would not do it because I don't want to be away from my environment here and miss up going upside down for 76 days. I'm just not going to do that. I would be willing to go on a 2 or 3 week trip. In fact, Lynn and I are doing a cruise next year, so I'll be gone for a week for the cruise and maybe another week for add-on trips. And I'm not flying myself on that. I wouldn't mind going back across the Atlantic one more time in the PC-12. I'm not uncomfortable with that at all. I would do it with Air Journey because they do a phenomenal job on the safety and the planning and the excursions, the hotel and the logistics and all the details. I would prefer to go to countries I haven't been to yet. There's still some countries I haven't been to that I would like to fly to. They have a trip that goes to Eurasia, which is a little harder to do now because you can't really quite get there with what's going on in the world today. And honestly, international travel is a little tougher today because of the state of global affairs, if you will.
Sure.
So I don't know. I would like, I'm not committed to do another trip, but I'm not committed not to do another trip.
You haven't buried it.
I haven't buried it, and I haven't committed to it.
Is there one airport in the world that you would like to fly into?
No, it's more country specific than airport specific now. Historically, I wanted to fly into the Hong Kong airport that you always saw in the movies.
Absolutely.
And I flew to Hong Kong, but that airport was gone. I flew to the other one. But I flew to Hong Kong. I flew to Dubai. I stayed at the Burj Al Arab that was hit by a missile this past weekend. That was the most incredible hotel I've ever been to in my life. I landed at Rock of Gibraltar, where you always see the cars crossing in the middle of the runway and the winds are swirling. And we came in, it wasn't a particularly windy day, but it was still a great experience. So there's not an airport. So if I would think about countries, I'm a little bit linear on how I think about things, or maybe black and white. So we went to Stann, Switzerland to visit Pilatus, but we landed in Basel. Basel's in France. The FBO was across the border in Switzerland.
Wow.
But I don't have a Switzerland flag because I didn't land in Switzerland. I landed in France. So I don't have a Switzerland flag.
That's funny.
I haven't landed in Germany. I haven't landed in Romania. So there's half a dozen European countries that I haven't been to. Well, there's a lot I haven't been to, but there's half a dozen
some that are on your mind.
I'd like
going
to go.
into Berlin would be kind of neat.
I would Berlin or Munich. I'm not sure which one I would go to, but I would like to fly to Germany because Lynn and I have watched a lot of detective series, and I do speak a little German, notwithstanding the fact I didn't do great in it in college. I speak simple German, but I don't know. I mean, I've flown to Havana, Cuba, for a ballroom competition. I've flown to Colombia.
That's a heck of a runway, isn't it?
Yeah,
Havana.
Yeah. It was 2014, 15, 16, somewhere in that ballpark. It was fun. I've flown to Colombia. I've flown to Peru. I've flown to Panama. I've flown to Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic.
Been to Iceland?
Oh, many times.
Spend some time in Iceland?
Many times.
Isn't that a neat place?
But GA, I always have to overnight in Iceland.
Yeah.
So we typically would spend a couple of nights. And if we land at Reykjavik. Now, if I'm just stopping for fuel, which I did one time, I landed in Keflavik, which is probably one of those, you asked me about things I probably, looking back, should not have done. So I did an air journey trip, and Matt, our son, was with me, and Terry Pui, the owner of Air Journey, did right seat with me for most of the time we were in Europe. And Lynn she airlined back home, and so then Matt and I were in Shannon, and Terry wants to go back home he has a home in south of Spain, and he said, I'm going to have a pilot come over from the U.S. and fly back with you. I said, you don't have to do that. I've done half a dozen crossings. I know what I'm doing. I'll be fine. So I flew home from Shannon, Ireland to Atlanta in the Citation single pilot. Matt was in the plane, but in the cockpit, but he's not a pilot.
Right.
So he and I flew single pilot, and it wasn't hard. I was at 45,000 feet. There was no weather. But by the time I got to Atlanta, I was a little tired, I will admit.
I bet.
So we went Shannon, Keflavik, Goose, somewhere down around Washington, D.C., in Virginia, or somewhere down there, I can't remember, then there to Atlanta.
That's a long day.
It was a long day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was not the smartest decision I've ever made. I wouldn't do that again.
We learn from them all.
Yes, we do.
Well, Jimmy, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. This is a cool thing to get to see through the eyes of a CEO. And then, like I said, 7,600 hours of flight time with the airplanes you've flown. It's very, very interesting.
Well, you were one of those guys I used to talk to about flying all the time. And that gleam in your eye about flying hasn't disappeared from those early days when we talked about flying to now.
It's in my blood. It's passionate about it. I love it. It's neat. You get bit by the aviation bug, and it's there.
Pretty good bug to be bitten by.
It is. All right. Thank you, sir.
All right, man.
Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
All right.